this so much faster. So, Psychic Sonic is contrary to what the game tells you, this is not a game of chance. It's not a game about guessing. It is actually a reaction-based minigame, right? And a big thing about this particular game is that while you're playing it, right, you will get a card, and on the card is the button you're supposed to press, and you're supposed to press it at the right. You're supposed to press the button that it wants you to press. So what I will do is I'll show you like the first few. I'll show you like the first few cards, and then I'll go into breaking it down. So, with Psychic Sonic, like I said, it is a twitch reaction-based game based on your ability to discern the scribble on the card and being able to press what the actual right button is, right? So, as you can see, everyone gets 4 cards, right? You get the X, Y, A, B, and that corresponds to the buttons on your controller, right? Now, from the pot in the center, a card will show up, and on that card, it'll rotate between these 4 buttons. And as it keeps rotating between the 4 buttons, one of the buttons will start to stand out more than the others. That button is what you have to press. And there is a general logic to it that is pretty easy to follow, but ultimately boils down to practice, because without practice, you're not going to be able to see the cues. So it will go through all 4 buttons first, just like one time. That's a single cycle, right? It'll show X, Y, A, B, and then after that, that's when the button legitimately starts to become very legible, becomes readable for the most part. It's actually technically readable within the first cycle, towards the end of the first cycle, and also on top of that, you can actually press the button that you need to press from the jump, but it usually takes until the end of the first cycle and the start of the second cycle for most people to be able to figure out what button you're supposed to press. So, I'm going to save state here. So, A, B, X, Y, A, B, X, Y, A, B, X, Y, and then after 2 cycles, the computers will usually kick in and then pick the button that you're supposed to press, right? 1, 2, 3. Right here, at this point, after a single cycle, is like, at least for me on average, is the earliest where you can tell what button you're supposed to press. I'll tell you how to get it later, like tomorrow we can talk about that, but not right now. So right now the button is X. That's the button. No, that's not X. That's the starting button, sorry. Right, there you go. The button is Y because the RNG wasn't reshuffled. But as you can see, after the first cycle, the Y becomes way easier to tell compared to everything else. So it goes through the cycle once, and then you get the button that you're supposed to press. So because of this, once you get used to the style of how the card rotates, it becomes really easy to pick out what button you're supposed to press before anyone else. Now, it's not like I can open up Photoshop to show you exactly what to pick, but as you can just tell just by watching me, it's not something that you have to guess. Oh, that was a Y. Okay, so now that I've given you that example, here's the thing that I want to really talk about in terms of figuring out how to do Psychic Sonic. If you look at the cards to your side, or the cards on the side, basically your character's cards, right? X and B have very distinct designs and patterns, while Y and A have very similar patterns, or like when they're overlapped, they look very similar. And that's just mostly because on the left side of A and the left side of Y, they have the same general curvature, right? So the trick to figuring out what button to press and when boils down to your ability to, one, tell immediately if it's an X or B. Because they're so distinct from each other and all the other cards, you have to, step 1, find out if it's an X or B, and if it is not an X or B, you need to figure out if it's a Y or an A. Now, because Y and A look so close to each other, what happens is that you have to look for some sort of key. So like right here, if you look at the top right of the card in the center, you see this little round section where the Y, where the Y is, that little round edge towards the top right of Y. That is what I personally use to specifically let me know that a Y is on top. And to the actually maybe what I should do is, this might help if I can show cursor. Can I show cursor? Oh yeah, that's perfect. Okay, fantastic. All right, so the top right of this part of the card lets you know that it's a Y, okay? And then this little tail, this little pointy part right here lets you know that it's an X, right? And then with A is easy to tell in the sense that it's very clearly an A over everything else. So this, if you see it look like this, that means it's an A, right? But as the cycles go, like on the second cycle, this part of the Y starts to stand out more than anything else. So if you see this little bump right here, it's a Y, and if you don't see this little bump, that's an A. And this is after you've discerned whether it's not an X or B. So bam, that is a Y. So we're gonna go through one cycle. Okay, so now we have done one cycle, so now the card that you want to pick is gonna be very clear to see. In this case, it's a B. And okay, there you go. I don't know why it was acting up like that. The B stands out more than everything else. So here, there you go. Why? Because the little bump stood out over everything else. And this is an A because, oh, see, the A and the Y tripped me up. That's probably the hardest part about this particular game. B. And another B. So, I guess to regurgitate it all pretty quickly is the two things that you need to do in order to really iron out this game is to figure out if it's an X or B first. The X is pretty clear because the sides of the X are distinct from everything else. You can't find that anywhere else. So as a result, if you don't see this X, then you can rule that out. And because the B stands out for the bottom right of the card, if you don't see this little bottom part of the B, that means it's neither X or B, and therefore you start looking to see if you can find the little loop of Y. And once you can figure out if there is the loop of Y or there isn't, then you know if it's a Y or A. So ultimately you're processing, you're going through a process of elimination incredibly quickly where you start with X and B and then you look for a Y, and then that from there on out, that's how you figure out what card it is for Psychic Sonic. So let me load up save state 1 so that I can get a new seed for the card RNG. I wish there was like a slowdown button. Maybe I should have done this in RetroArch. Alright, so
2, 1, go!
Alright, so first one is A. The second one is A. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to pause exactly when I can recognize it. B. There you go. So this form of B stands out more than anything else. So for the rest of this card, the B is going to be more visible. So I recognize it was a B simply because of this bottom right section. Bottom right, bottom half, so on and so forth. Because of this section right here, I was able to tell it was a B. And with this next card, that is an X. Because of these little two things that stick out on the side before, and then also there's a lack of closed loops because there's a lack of closed loops on the outside, if you don't see any sort of loop, because with the Y you see this little loop over here, with the B you see this little loop down here, and then with the A you see this little loop on the side. There's always some sort of curvature, some relatively soft curvature that's happening on one side of the card, and when you don't see this curvature, that's another way to tell if it's an X or not. And B, again, bottom half right here. A. And the reason why I say it was an A is because when the A showed up, it was very clear. That's like the easiest way to tell if it's an A as well, is if it just shoots to your head, shoots into your mind, the first word A. It's so clear because it's at that point, it's an A overlapping an A. So the way Psychic Sonic works is while it is showing all 4 face buttons, right? The actual correct button to press is layered underneath it. And as time goes on, the transparency of the right button layered underneath it increases. So the button you're supposed to press becomes more visible as time goes on. But the letter and the letters that you're not supposed to press, the letters that it's confusing you with, become invisible as time goes on. So for A, if it's very clear immediately after the first cycle that you see an A, if that's the first thing that you see, then it's an A. If you're not too sure if it's an A after the first cycle, then it most likely is a Y, and at that point you need to look for this top loop, this top curve that shows up in the top right of the card. So that's how I personally go about figuring out whether it's an A or a Y after discerning whether it is not an X or a B. A. See? Bam. You see how clear that A is, how legible that A is? That's how you know it is an A. Because if it was any other number, it would not be this clean, this easy to read immediately after the cycle ends, after the first cycle ends. So I guess I'll summarize it once more. The way to really get good at, because of course regardless you have to practice, the way to get good at Psychic Sonic is 1. Wait for the first cycle to pass. A cycle is when it goes through all 4 face buttons at first, or just period, right? When it goes through all 4 face buttons and then starts over, that is 1 cycle. So again, A, B, X, Y. 2, once the first cycle passes, you need to immediately tell if it is an X or a B. And you can tell it's an X from the jump if you can see this little line through the X. If that stands out after the first cycle and you see no curvatures, no loops, no soft parts on the outside of the letter, then it's an X. Because again, this Y has this loops, this little soft curvature on the top right, the B has this curvature on the bottom, and the A has this curvature on the left. If you look at the curvatures from A, Y, and B, they almost make a complete circle, right? So if you fail to see any curvatures on the outside and you also notice the line through the X, then it's an X. Now, if you can confirm that it is not an X, what you want to look for is you look at the bottom. And if you can see this curvature on the bottom right here, then it's a B. And that's the first thing you have to do after waiting for the cycle. You need to figure out if it is a X or is a B. And if it is not an X or a B, then at that point you need to shift your focus to 2 other things, which then brings us to the next step. You need to look for the soft curvature in the top right, or you need to see if the letter A is incredibly legible over everything else. So if you can follow this process for Psychic Sonic, you're basically going from X, B, Y, and A in terms of process of elimination, and that's how you are able to be like, okay, I know what button to press. And if you can really get a handle on that, really feel it deep down in your soul, you'll wash the computers and you'll most likely wash all the other players every single time. Because your ability to process this information and go through this process of elimination as fast as possible is the trick to being good at Psychic Sonic. So I hope that helps anyone who sees this in the future how to play this particular game very well. So let's just cut that off for that shuffle.